And good morning, everyone. I'm Kira Phillips. We are coming on the air with major developments in the Middle East. ABC News has now confirmed, after more than a year of fighting, a ceasefire deal in Gaza is now in place between Israel and Hamas. The agreement coming after breakthroughs in talks in Qatar. The agreement including the release of the dozens of hostages being held right now by Hamas. The Biden administration says there are 7 American hostages still in Gaza. At least 3 of them are believed to be alive. Officials say that Hamas has agreed to release 2 of them in the initial weeks of the ceasefire. In exchange, Israel will release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. Israel will also pause fighting so desperately needed aid can finally get into Gaza. With just days left in office, this ceasefire deal was one of President Biden's top priorities. As you know, it has been in the works for months. The White House now working closely with President-elect Donald Trump's Mideast negotiator to broker this deal. Trump has been blunt, warning if these hostages are not back by the time he returns to office, that without hesitation, all hell would break out in the Middle East. Let's get straight to our foreign correspondent, Ian Pannell, with more. Ian, tell us what you know.
Yeah, Kira, that's right. We've been hearing from various different sources really over the last couple of days, and this momentum appears to have gathered. So we're now expecting a press conference to be held by the Qatari Prime Minister. Remember, the negotiations have been taking place in Qatar. Qatar has essentially hosted conversations, separate conversations have been taken together with the Israeli hostage negotiators and Hamas, but it's also involved the work of Egypt and the incoming Trump administration, as well as the Biden team. This is something the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has been working on for a long time. The details: this is a temporary ceasefire for now. Phase 1 would include the gradual release of hostages. We don't know the condition of those hostages. It's entirely possible that some of them will be dead, and it will be bodies that will be returned to their loved ones. In all, we're expecting in this first 42-day period, so 6 weeks, we're expecting a developing, evolving process whereby Hamas releases 3 prisoners in the first tranche in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, which is controversial for some Israelis here who are adamantly against this deal. It's something that Netanyahu's managed to get through his security cabinet, despite objections from some of the more hard, far-right members of the security cabinet. In terms of the process, so you have the 6-week process. There'll be movement of troops pulling back from certain areas, and as those stages develop, so that will eventually, assuming there are no breaches of the ceasefire, lead to a full withdrawal. There have been a lot of different elements that have proved controversial in this, but the headline is, brokered by the Biden administration, the incoming Trump team, Egypt, Qatar, and of course involving Israel and Hamas, is that there will be a ceasefire, which is clearly going to be great news for the population of Gaza. Remember, more than 46,000 people have been killed throughout this more than 15-month war. Obviously, hundreds of Israelis also killed on that October 7th attack, but also a number of Israeli soldiers also killed in the military operation that's been undergone in Gaza. It'll also include the flooding of Gaza with humanitarian aid. That's a key part of this negotiation, and then eventually that will lead to reconstruction. But it'll be great news for Israel, clearly amazing news for the Palestinians who've been stuck in Gaza in this living hell for so long now. We're still waiting for official announcements, though, to be clear. We need to hear that from the Qatari Prime Minister. We're expecting an announcement also to come from the Israelis. As you mentioned, President Trump has already posted on social media about this, but we will also probably hear something from the White House that once these other announcements have been made. But after such a long, painful period, for so many people in this region, it's going to be broadly welcomed. As I mentioned, there is a section of Israeli society that's against it. They don't want to see Palestinian prisoners released. They say they're terrorists, that even if it means not returning the hostages, not returning the bodies of those who've been killed, that the war should continue. I think one thing that we should really bear in mind is there are 3 phases prescribed in this text that we have been given access to. Again, we need to see it in the flesh when it's actually published. But the sticking points, the real sticking points, is what comes next. Who runs Gaza? Now, Hamas, as the elected body, clearly feel that they should be the ones to run Gaza. That's a total non-starter for the Israelis. So in some senses, some of the really stickier points of this agreement have been kicked into the long grass, but they're going to have to be dealt with. While phase one is underway, negotiations have to start for phase two of the deal and then eventually for phase three. So it's a complicated process. I would say it's very fragile. You know, a lot of people are hoping that the guns will fall silent, but we have to wait and see how it pans out and whether these negotiations can continue. Kira?
Ian, you mentioned the White House. Let's get straight to our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce. Mary, I'm seeing now that the president-elect has put it out on Truth Social. We have a deal for the hostages in the Middle East. They will be released shortly. Thank you. We're getting that from Donald Trump. Also, Steve Witkoff, his special envoy to the Middle East, we can now confirm has been involved in these negotiations. What are you hearing from the White House?
Well, look, this certainly is a deal that President Biden has worked for many, many months. This administration has been painstakingly trying to get this over the finish line, and it certainly was a top priority for President Biden to get this done before he leaves office now in just days. But we are also told that President Biden felt it was very important that there be very little daylight between his administration and the incoming Trump administration. Of course, they wanted to present a united message to negotiators. They also were well aware that any deal that was likely to be achieved would, of course, carry over into the next administration. As the National Security Advisor explained it to us, they wanted to make sure that nothing was missed between the cup and the lip, and that is why they made sure to bring in Steve Witkoff, the incoming administration's Middle East envoy, into these conversations. And President Biden himself has been deeply involved in all of this. He's been working the phones back here. He has spoken with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Qatari leader. He's spoken with President Sisi of Egypt in the last few days, making sure that he is obviously informed of all of this as well. But of course, the timing is certainly notable. It's hard to ignore the fact that this appears to be finally getting over the finish line with just days left in this administration. And as Donald Trump certainly has been upping the pressure, promising that all hell will break loose if the remaining American hostages are not released by the time he gets into office. But the fact that they have worked closely on this politically will certainly allow both the current administration and the incoming administration to take some credit for this. We have not heard directly from President Biden yet. I suspect that certainly will change. Kira.
Mary, thank you. Let's get to our chief global affairs correspondent, Martha Raddatz. Martha, you have been to the region several times shortly after the attacks as well. You were there on the one-year anniversary. Remind us all just how horrific this attack was and what these hostages have likely been through.
Well, Kira, I think it is astonishing still to go into those kibbutzes and see the damage and destruction that was caused in them and the lives that were taken and the hostages that were taken. I was there just days after the attack. Remember, 1,200 people were killed, 250 hostages were taken, a little more than 100 of those returned, several of them dead in November. But for those families, when I visited again this last October, the first anniversary, there was one hostage family I spoke to, the brother of twin 26-year-old men who were taken hostage on that day, on October 7th, who said when they learned the brothers were alive, it was the best day of his life. But since watching how some of those hostages have been treated and what they have been going through, there was great fear about what shape they would be in if, in fact, they are alive a year or so later, 15 months later. And I do think those hostage families are feeling that today. Yes, there are several that are supposed to be alive, several dual citizens, 3 American-Israeli citizens, but there is always concern what shape they will be in, especially after these many, many months away from their families. You have to remember on these kibbutzes, it's just a mile away to see Gaza, to see where their loved ones were being held, standing there with that brother and watching him look across there. He came to that kibbutz all the time just to think of his brother. So you have to think about what those hostage families are going through. But as Ian points out so well, you also have to realize what Palestinians not closely affiliated with Hamas have been going through in Gaza. The destruction there is enormous. 2.6 million people, 90%, it is estimated, have been displaced. And again, Hamas says 46,000 have been killed. Kara?
Martha, thank you. Let's get right to our foreign correspondent, Tom Sufi Burge, on the streets of Tel Aviv. Tom, you have time and time again talked to the family members of these hostages. Have you been able to talk to any of them? But more importantly, what is happening right there on the streets now as this news comes through?
Yeah, Kara, so we're right outside the headquarters of the Israeli Defense Forces, a building up there, and you can see this demonstration there trying to close the traffic on this main route. But as you say, we've been here week after week after week, massive demonstrations in this area every weekend, really, for months and months and months. And I'm not really confident that all of these people have actually heard the news, because we're bringing to it right now that there is a deal, we think, and that a deal has been signed off on by both sides, even though we haven't seen that formal agreement in writing. But, you know, there's clearly, I think there will be celebration. These people will be very happy that there's a deal, but there's a big but. The caveat, Kira, is that, you know, amongst the families of the hostages in Gaza, there is a fear that there will be this initial 6-week ceasefire, yes, but it won't potentially turn into a permanent ceasefire. And some, the male soldiers, for example, and some of the men, the hostages still held in Gaza, won't be released in this deal if there isn't a phase 2 and a phase 3. I mean, look, you can see there's hundreds of people. You know, there's a lot of anger towards the Israeli government amongst this section of Israeli society, and they've remained determined throughout. So if this deal is again confirmed by the Israeli government and Hamas, then, you know, it will be a massive, massive, massive moment for the families. And yes, I have been speaking to 2 of the families of American hostages. There are, we believe, only 3 American hostages potentially still alive inside Gaza right now. And US officials are saying they believe 2 of them will be released if there is this 6-week ceasefire and the deal. And that would be Keith Siegel. And I've been speaking to his brother Lee multiple times over the last few months, but we've been exchanging text messages tonight. And to be honest with you, right now, they're on tenterhooks. They don't know, you know, what quite to believe. And the reports in the last half an hour, to be honest with you, have been very confusing about saying there is a deal, there isn't a deal. Hamas might have made new demands, according to one Israeli official, related to control of this southern strip of land in Gaza, the border with Egypt, effectively, and whether or not Israeli troops would fully withdraw from that area called the Philadelphia Corridor. And I've also spoken to Jonathan Decker-Hen, the father of Sagi Decker-Hen. He's in his 30s, he's got young kids just like me. And, you know, I know Jonathan, again, is once again just watching everything, praying, you know, hoping that this is the case, that there is a deal, and that Sagi will be included. I think, you know, what we do know from this draft negotiating framework we've seen is that elderly males like Keith Siegel, an American citizen, will almost certainly be part of that, and he will be coming home if this is the case. But Sagi is 35. He is a civilian, so he was not in the IDF on October the 7th when he was taken from the family kibbutz near Gaza. But, you know, it's not 100%, you know, that he would be in a deal. He could be, and we hope he will be. And US officials, from what they've been telling us, suggesting they hope that is the case too. So, you know, I think this news is just coming through. You can see that people are still out on the streets, and they're protesting for a deal. And we hope and we think that deal is now in place. Kira?
More on that deal. Ian, I want to take it back to you. I understand now we have a statement from Hamas.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's a little vague, but it expresses positive tones towards what's been going on. They say the movement dealt with all responsibility and positivity based on its responsibility towards our patient and steadfast people in Gaza by stopping what they call the Zionist aggression against them. They say that they've given their full and official response to the Qatari negotiators, and all sides really have been at pains to try and ensure that there haven't been leaks to the media. Obviously, we have had some, but the official announcement should really come from the Qataris. I mean, it looks like that was hard to control. Just to let you know that the Israeli cabinet, security cabinet, is going to meet tomorrow to ratify this. It then has to go to the full cabinet. There's then a period of 48 hours to allow for any legal objections. Entirely possible cases will be brought before the Israeli Supreme Court. So there are still these steps to be taken before we see the start of phase one, possibly by the weekend, but we just have to wait and see. Kira?
Ian, thank you. Want to take you to live pictures now, just outside of a hospital there in Gaza. You know, the last time there was a ceasefire, that was back in November of 2023. It lasted a very short time. It ended up falling apart. So what is going to make this deal so different this time around, with so much destruction, such a huge death toll, so many lives lost? Let's go to former State Department official, retired Colonel Steve Ganyard for this, and just talking about the future of Gaza now, what it could mean for the people, the humanitarian crisis, the aid that hasn't been allowed to get into the area, and also just the future of the Middle East now, as we're about to have a new administration leading our country. Steve.
Yeah, Kira, this is the first of several initial steps that had to have been taken, get the hostages out, come to some sort of a ceasefire. But the bigger questions here, as you note, are what becomes of Gaza? How will Israel prevent another October 7th? Will they surround Gaza and it'll be very limited in the kinds of aid that they'll let come in? Who will run the rehabilitation and the reconstruction? Will it be the Qataris, the Egyptians? Clearly, the U.S. will have a role there. How much Arab money? And it'll be billions and billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars to reconstruct Gaza. But the Israelis are not going to allow another October 7th. And so it'd be critical to figure out in the next set of negotiations, what does Gaza look like? Because that also means, what does the new Middle East look like? Obviously, Hezbollah has been crushed, if not fully defeated. Iran is out of Syria. Iran is effectively powerless within Lebanon. And so the whole Middle East map is shifting here. And the final piece that needs to get put into place is what happens with the Palestinians, what happens with Gaza, and how does Israel deal with that, ensuring that October 7th never happens again.
From this deal that we are seeing so far, these various phases, Steve, will Gaza see immediate relief within this deal when you're talking about a number of phases?
It's going to take time, Kira, and we all seen the almost unimaginable destruction in Gaza. That's a lot of concrete. That's a lot of rebuilding. That's months. Getting in the kinds of capabilities to do that kind of rebuilding is going to take years. Gaza will probably not be where at least Gazans and the Palestinians want it to be for a decade or more. But in a sense, Gaza is in the hands of the Palestinians now. If Hamas is still there, it'll be the Israelis probably are not going to be too favorable to Hamas coming back and controlling Gaza again. So how Hamas plays in the political development of Gaza, how the Israelis control that, what role the other Arab states, particularly the Qataris and the Egyptians have, are all questions to be determined, but they're critical for what becomes of the Middle East in the years to come.
And how exactly Hamas will take a role here? Will it stick to its word? Ian, panel, you're getting more from that side of things. What do you know?
Yeah, that's right, Kira. We're now getting much more detail from Hamas themselves. There are various stages, as we already know, in this temporary ceasefire and this first tranche. What they're talking about is, firstly, the withdrawal of Israeli forces. Now, that will finally take place if we get into phase 3. That won't happen immediately, although there will be a relocation. Second, opening of the crossings. This, of course, has been a critical issue. You were just talking to Steve, of course, about the humanitarian situation. Certainly, if you look at the details that we've been given so far, humanitarian relief is very high on the agenda, almost simultaneously with this relocation of Israeli forces, but getting much-needed aid in. We've seen people have been forced to live rough, living in tents, the outbreak of disease, newborn babies dying, the hospitals have been decimated. So it really is absolutely critical to get that relief in there. Third, yes, to get relief and shelter for people. Of course, so many homes have been destroyed, so the need to start rebuilding to allow people to at least get indoors. It's not freezing, but it gets cold in this part of the world. And if you're living outside, especially with young families, they're very vulnerable. The next stage is the release of prisoners. Now, they're talking about the release of 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, including women and children under the age of 19, in exchange for 33 of the hostages. What it says on the hostages, he says alive and dead, provided that the negotiations will be completed in later stages. They also talk about the return of the displaced, freedom of movement, and then further negotiation process. So it's kind of what we thought it would be. Let's wait until we hear from Prime Minister Netanyahu for their take on it. I think it's reasonable to expect excuse me, there's going to be political spin from both sides because they have to sell it domestically. Neither side wants to admit that it's had to make concessions, but of course, that is the reality. But I think it's really important to remember, as we've been discussing here, that there are some really thorny issues that are being kicked into the long grass. They're going to have to be dealt with in the coming weeks. And finding an agreement when Israel has vowed to crush Hamas, that Hamas can no longer be part of the solution. Of course, they've had to negotiate with them, albeit not directly. How on earth are you going to square that circle? Kira.
Ian, thank you. Let's get back to the streets of Tel Aviv, where we find our Tom Sufi. Burge, you've had a chance to talk with some people now as the news is spreading of this deal. Tom, tell us what they're saying.
Yeah, news is reaching these people now that definitely looks like there is a deal, and the U.S. government is telling us that. Look, I mean, you can see people are burning candles tonight, flames. I mean, have a look down here. Lukash, if you just move in, have a look. That writing there effectively says in Hebrew, they all have value. And I think that chimes with a message which we've been hearing from the forum supporting the families of the hostages, that, yes, of course, we're delighted if there's a deal, and 33 hostages, most of them are believed to be still alive, but some of them, sadly, amongst those 33 are potentially not. They're very happy that there will be a deal, but they are worried that this initial 6-week ceasefire and 33 hostages out in return for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners and other conditions might not actually lead to a second and a third phase of the deal. We're right outside the headquarters of the IDF. We've been in this location, Kira, on ABC News live many times. And come with me and just have a walk down the street, because this isn't a huge demonstration, but people have been building here, and obviously it's a weekday. And you can see people are now blocking the traffic. If you just come through here, excuse me, sorry, you'll see the buses are all stopped. So actually, I've seen this scene before when a deal didn't look imminent, but they're still blocking the traffic. They still want to make their point heard. And in terms of reaction from people in the crowd here, I've just had a chance to speak to. One guy said to me, I'll believe it when Prime Minister Netanyahu says it. He'll believe that there is a deal when it actually, words to that effect, come out of the mouth of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And another lady just now said to me, yes, I'm delighted, but I'm fearful. And again, she's getting at that point which they were making with the candle demonstration back over here, that, you know, they're worried about the fate of the other hostages. So just to recap, in terms of the hostages under the draft negotiating framework that we've seen, we're talking about 33 hostages, most of them believed to be alive. We're talking about all the child hostages, all of the female hostages, crucially including the female soldiers in amongst the hostages. You can hear the drums coming up because more people are moving down this way, so we're just going to move a little bit this way. But it would not, Kira, crucially include all of the Israeli male soldiers who were taken on October 7th during that terror attack. So, look, I think there's a mixture of emotions here. people are happy. We're going to move away from the drums here. You can see it's always lively. These demonstrations are all lively. We'll keep on the side because the traffic is now moving again, thankfully for these people. But you can clearly sense that, yes, people are happy. This is a massive moment for Israel, a massive moment for the hostages, the families, but there is concern. And if you look, again, I mean, it's quite a powerful image if you come around here of these candles, people holding a vigil. So, yes, the news is coming through to them that dozens of hostages, potentially up to 33, most of them alive, will be brought out of Gaza potentially in the next 6 weeks. But they are worried about the remaining hostages. And overall, there's thought to be just short of 100 hostages still in Gaza. Israeli officials have suggested to us that potentially about a third of them are believed to be dead. So it could mean that many more hostages won't be released in this initial 6-week phase of the deal. Kira?
Tom, thank you. Ian, you know, Israel has long said their goal, or its goal, was to completely eliminate Hamas. So considering the deal that we are looking right now before us, is that off the table?
I think if you talk to certain members of Prime Minister Netanyahu's security cabinet, they will say, no, absolutely not, and they will want to retain the right to go after Hamas. And they also say very clearly that Hamas can't be part of what comes next in Israel. But it always struck me as a kind of unrealistic target to eliminate Hamas. Hamas is voted in by the people. A lot of people support the organization, and eradicating it totally, even despite all the destruction, all the death, all the displacement, has proved almost impossible. I mean, one Israeli military unit today was releasing video footage of clashes still taking place. So there are still Hamas elements there. And as we've seen in other countries and other conflicts, at some point, even if they're categorized as terrorist organizations, conversations need to be had. So I think that's still a huge problem that is not going to go away. Everyone's just pushed it to one side for now in the interest of getting the guns to fall silent, of getting the hostages out, for Hamas getting Palestinian prisoners home, but crucially, relieving the thousands, hundreds of thousands of innocent Palestinians inside Gaza to alleviate their suffering, allow them to go home, allow schools to sit, hospitals to reopen. The reconstruction cost is going to be enormous. Qatar possibly will help with that, as it has in the past. But there's so much work to be done, and I think we just need to wait and see when this is implemented. If all goes well on the Israeli side, we could see that first stage start by the weekend. Kira?
All right, Ian, thank you. Martha, just looking back at past administrations, all the way back to Jimmy Carter and his administration and Middle East peace deals, we're talking about an outgoing and an incoming president possibly working together here to put this together. How remarkable is that in your eyes?
It is remarkable, and of course we were reminded of Jimmy Carter's hostage deal at his funeral recently last week. And one of the things that Jimmy Carter did was talk about the hostages in Iran. Iran was holding 53, 52 hostages for 444 days. It became a hallmark of his presidency, but Iran did not release those hostages until Ronald Reagan was sworn in. That was always a pain in the heart for Jimmy Carter, although he was thrilled that the hostages were eventually released. Now you have these two, President Trump's team and President-elect Trump's team and President Biden's team working together to try to get this deal over the finish line. Certainly the pressure that Donald Trump had put on already, even before coming into office, probably had an effect, saying all hell will break loose if this doesn't happen before I take office. And that, of course, is on Monday. I'm also reminded of the effort that the Biden administration put into this deal. Constant shuttle diplomacy. As soon as the attack by Hamas on Israel happened, President Biden went over, he met with Netanyahu, and one of the things he said is, learn the lessons that we learned from 9/11. Don't go too far, essentially, because you will have people who will join that Hamas movement. Just yesterday, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, said, indeed, we assess that Hamas has recruited almost as many new militants as it has lost, and the Israelis estimate that there were 18,000 fighters lost. He said that is a recipe for an enduring insurgency and perpetual war. Those were the words that President Biden, Tony Blinken were trying to convince Hamas of, the Israelis of, during this period. Kira.
Martha, thank you. Clearly, this war has haunted the last year in office for President Joe Biden. He now just has 5 days left before he leaves office. Let's get to the White House once again with our Mary Bruce. When do you think we'll hear from our president, Mary?
Well, Kira, I am told that we will likely hear from the president shortly on all of this. Now, no official comment from the White House just yet, but this was a top priority, if not the top priority, for the president in the remaining days of his administration to finally get this deal done, something that he has tirelessly worked for many, many months. Of course, it was back in last May when he first put forward this framework that was really the launching point for the agreement that we believe we are now going to see unfolding here. And the president, yes, he did feel very strongly that he work with the incoming administration on this, that there be no daylight between them, bringing in Donald Trump's envoy so that they could work on this together. We have, of course, seen Donald Trump already taking credit for this, calling the deal epic, saying, that it's an example of what he can achieve, saying, look what we've achieved, even before he's been able to take office. There will be plenty of time to unpack the Trump effect on all of this, but there's no question that this current administration laid the groundwork, worked tirelessly on this, and of course, President Biden, for him, it is personal. He has spent a lot of time with the families of the hostages, most recently in November, just after the election, promising them that he was going to do everything he could to bring them home.
Trump calling it epic. President Biden, no doubt, probably calling it quite a relief.